Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's very nearly the end of August, so time for me to do a September TBR video. I love making these because it kind of organises me for the month ahead, and it's lovely if you also want to watch them. I suppose it might give you a few ideas, and also I really love it when you then people then comment and say, oh, I've read that, or I'm planning on reading that, or that's really good, or I wouldn't bother with that. It's all good. So this is in theory a short and sweet September TBR, but not literally short. I've got a couple of must reads this month, and that's the 2 books I have left out of the 6 for judging the BookTube Prize final for fiction. And those are Trust by Hernan Diaz and Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart. I'm looking forward to both of them. They're both quite chunky, so I'm going to read them first in the month so that Robert, the wonderful organiser of the BookTube Prize, doesn't have to fret that I haven't, finished and got my ratings in. Then I've got 2 other sort of musts, which is I've got 2 sort of long, slow buddy reads going on. One of Aurora Leigh by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the Victorian sort of novel in verse. And the other is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And so I need to do my chunks for both of those. So those are kind of the musts. Then we're on to the what would I also like to read in the month of September? Well, one thing is A Passage to India by Ian Forster, because that's the next book in the Forster read-along that Jen the Librarian is hosting, and I've managed to keep up with it so far. We're reading all the novels in order of publication, and although this will be a reread, I'm thinking, I should fit it in because it's that completist thing. I've started on this, so I've got to finish. Then we're on to the more sort of like I want to, because I don't want to miss out on BookTube events, because I'm hopeless about that. I've got terrible fear of missing out for this. And firstly, I want to take part in Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plots, brand new reading event, Straya September. I can't do the accent, but I think that's sort of an Australian way of saying Australia, but not quite, they don't pronounce all the letters in the word. Now, the essential prompt for this is to read an Australian author, a book from Australia. That's all that Scott is asking of us. And the one I've picked for that is The Performance by Claire Thomas. Now, it's a novel about women at a theatre in Melbourne, and they're watching a performance of a play by Samuel Beckett, Happy Days, which I happen to have read, so that's a nice connection, and sort of thinking about their insights into their lives. And meanwhile, you have the backdrop of their bushfires happening and kind of encroaching on the city. I've picked that because it was Scott's review of that novel that made me kind of put it on my sort of long-term wish list type TBR last year. So that's that one. The other one fits another. Scott's got sort of 3 supplementary prompts, and one of those is to read a book by an immigrant Australian author, so first or second generation. And for that, I'm going to read When the Ground is Hard by Malla Nunn. Now, Nunn was born in what was then Swaziland, what is now Eswatini. She moved to Australia as an older child or teenager, and with her family, and so is now an Australian author, but also wonderfully fulfills my need to read a book from Eswatini by an author from Eswatini as part of my Reading Around the World Scallydandling Challenge. So perfect. It's sort of young adult, but I understand that it's not. It's a kind of young adult book that absolutely also appeals to adult. She also writes adult books. She writes detective stories that are set in South Africa, but I wanted to read this one because this is set in what was then Swaziland, when it was Swaziland, and is about kind of two girls at boarding school, and how sort of the apartheid sort of race laws affect them and their friendships. But they also, apparently, they bond over a shared copy of Jane Eyre. And as we're running up to Victober, that just was irresistible. So that's my two things that I'm going to read for Straya September, which brings me to the main event of September for me, which is Shorty September. Shorty September is hosted by Bert of Storytime and sort of ably assisted by Heather of Soggy Expat Book Nerd. And I love short novels and novellas. I have a bit of a thing about them, and I have a slight tendency to kind of collect them, in secondhand bookshops or new or as ebooks, and just to illustrate the point. Okay, so this, can I pick it up? This is the pile of short books that I would like to read this Shorty September. This is my physical short book DPR. I'm not going to get through all of these, and I'm not even going to tell you about the ebooks that I've got. So I've got the Shorty September e-zine, which has all 12 Shorty September prompts in it, beautifully created by Heather, and I will link to the announcement video by Bert, but also Heather's video where she gives you the link, so you can print off your copy of the e-zine if you want to. And I've penciled in a book from this pile for all 12 of the prompts, and we'll see how I get on. The one that I will read first probably is The Low Voices by Manuel Rivas. So he's a Spanish novelist, well-known Spanish novelist. I've never read anything by him, and this is the closest in this pile to a must-read, because it's actually my last book as a kind of a hangover from the Women's World Cup Readathon, which I had such fun hosting. What a brilliant group of participants it was, and my wonderful fellow hosts Mark and Alice and Jack, and obviously Spain. The Spanish team won the Women's World Cup, and so this is my Spanish book to read for that. So that's a definite, and it's about growing up in Franco's Spain, and it's sort of autobiographical, but in the Annie Ernaux sort of mode of having something that's very much based on your own and your family's experience, but you then slightly sort of turn into something that reads more like a novel, and yeah, that's a definite. I'm very keen to get to The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. The reason I'm so keen to get to this one is because in July I went for a wonderful day out in London with 26 other booktubers, organised by Katie of Books and Things, and I picked up this in a secondhand bookshop on that day out. We did a bookshop. What's the word? Crawl, a bookshop crawl, and because it was particularly recommended by Oliver, and I will link to Oliver's booktube channel down below. Thank you, Oliver. And I meant to get you to sort of sign it that you'd recommended it to me, and I forgot. There we go. Hopeless. And I'm also very much hoping to read A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, because I last read this back in, basically when it came out. And it's just become really kind of, it's got a real buzz around it again. Rightly because it's a good book, but I'm not exactly sure why. And again, I picked this up on that booktuber bookshop crawl. So and finally, two more. This one is fits one of the prompts beautifully, because it asks for suggests reading some sort of slasher book. This is Death Note. It's manga, and I've been reading more sort of comics and graphic memoirs and so on, and Nal, who was one of the participants in the Women's World Cup readathon, is a manga enthusiast, and I asked her to recommend a sort of a first try of manga for me, and this was one of the ones she recommended. And again, I got it when I was in London with on our little bookshop outing. And finally, this one I think is a definite, because this Isabel Waidner, Corey Farr Does Social Mobility, is a bit of a buzz book at the moment. Really, I mean, it's unusual in style. It's yeah. I mean, the blurb says it's authentically radical. Whew, that sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds like a Ros book. And this was kindly given to me by Bob the Bookerer on our day out in London, because he'd ended up with 2 copies. So thank you, Bob, and I wanted to get to it sooner rather than later. So, and then if I can get as many of the others of these that I can get through as I can. Look, if I hold them up to the there we go. If you know one of these and know it's particularly good, tell me in the comments, okay? I hope you're planning a really exciting September, and also looking forward to October and Victober. Watch out for announcements for that on the 1st of September.